Hello again. This is John L. Hemphill with your History Moment, live from Philadelphia. In an earlier episode, we talked about the Declaration of Independence. Today, we'll talk about the reaction to the Declaration of Independence and how it changed the Revolutionary War and, for the most part, the world as we know it. I'm sitting in the garden outside of St. Mary's Catholic Church, which is the church behind me. It was built in the 1760s. That's the original front of the church. However, in the 1800s, they shifted the direction of the sanctuary, so now currently that's the rear. When you look at this church, it kind of tells you what large sanctuaries looked like at the time of the American Revolution and just before it, and it gives an idea just how cosmopolitan Philadelphia was at that particular time. Well, as we talked about in the last episode, July the 4th was the day that the final edits were complete for the Declaration of Independence that was passed. Even though this starts the United States, it also shifts how the war progressed. Up until that particular time, for about a year, most people, especially in other countries, saw the Declaration of Independence as not ever taking place. They saw the American Revolution as an internal dispute within the British Empire, sort of like a civil war. So if you were in Spain or France, you knew that there was fighting between His Majesty's troops and various people who were patriots, no matter what ethnicity or color they were, Native American, African, or Caucasian. But you saw it as an internal dispute that really didn't involve anything that you or your government did. The Declaration of Independence changes this. Individuals that, like Thomas Paine, suggest that we needed to join the table of nations to get the respect of other countries and to broaden the scope of the war, which is exactly what the Declaration of Independence did, because at that particular moment, it became a secessionist movement. Those who lived in the 13 colonies essentially were saying, we are no longer under King George III, we want to secede. And this opens the door for the French and eventually the Spanish Empire to get involved. Now, I will say this, that the French were involved in the American Revolution as far back as 1774 by smuggling arms to various ports, Philadelphia, Charleston, New York, until the British got there. That's actually what they had been doing. But now they could take a direct approach as well as a military and political approach. And this is the very thing that changes the nature of the American Revolution as a whole. So you start to see countries like France, Spain, the Netherlands get involved. Denmark knows about the American Revolution as well as Prussia and the Kingdom of Poland. Tsarist Russia also knew about it. They didn't know exactly how to respond to it initially right away. Many of them found out about the Declaration of Independence through envoys that they had in London, England at the time. But also, the reaction of the Declaration of Independence was pretty amazing here at home as well. It caused quite a stir in Philadelphia, which is where I'm at. But it also caused a stir with various other people in various other cities like Charleston, Baltimore, Richmond, Williamsburg, New York. Of course, Boston by this point had already seen some fighting. So what happened? Those who were patriots, who wanted to be independent of the British Crown, were all for it. Those who were loyalists, of course, were not. They saw it as treason. In colonies like Georgia, that is exactly how people saw it. At that time, Georgia was under attack by various native tribes, and they were using His Majesty's forces to protect the colony. However, how can you rebel against a colony when you need these forces to keep you safe? Well, of course, in Georgia, this became a problem. Back in Britain, the aristocracy was quite livid about the Declaration of Independence. Some thought it was more or less a trivial act, a piece of paper that had no real meaning, no real worth, no real benefit. As far as they were concerned, we were still under British rule, and with the British Army, which was largely a volunteer force, where people would join the army so that they could have 3 square meals a day and be safe, they felt that the British Army would enforce the law of the king, and such a declaration was pretty meaningless. And you can see why they felt this way. In 1776, very, very rarely did people break away from a king or a queen and succeed. The last time it had happened before 1776 was when the province of the United Netherlands broke away from Spain in the 1500s. It hadn't happened successfully for 200 years. So you could see why a lot of British aristocrats were basically saying, well, this declaration is meaningless. But some were very heated. They saw the declaration for exactly what it was, treason. And they wanted the king and his forces under General Howe, who had replaced General Gates, to totally stamp the revolution out. And they expected to do that. Of course, by July the 4th, you already had British troops walking into New York, at first landing in Staten Island, and then eventually moving into New York City itself, which was a much smaller city at the time, and it didn't even take up the whole island of Manhattan in those days. So you could kind of see how the American Revolution plays out. But anyway, that's the reaction of the Declaration of Independence as we approach its 250th anniversary. Feel free to subscribe and feel free to join me for another history moment. I'm John Hemphill from Philadelphia, signing off. Talk to you later.